Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone coming out on a winter day. This is going to be a very good program. I'm going to be very quick on my introductions. First of all, we want to thank all of our sponsors, and I want you to, you saw those scroll, and on your table you have a list of the sponsors. And if you get the opportunity to talk to any of those folks, thank them specifically for helping support this organization. And it's only because of the contributions that they make that we're able to keep control of our costs and keep our lunch prices at a reasonable rate for you. And again, thank you very much to the sponsors. The program today is Reaching Home, Missoula's 10-year plan to end homelessness. Next month, on our February program, on February 12th, we have Seth Bodner, the president of the University of Montana, is scheduled to speak. So put that on your calendars. And again, when you're going to come, please go online, register. It helps us on our scheduling. We know who's coming. On January is membership month for City Club Missoula. And on your table, you have these little slips of paper. And if you're currently a member, remember to sign up again. If you're not a member, we're having a special this month. Instead of $50 for annual dues, it's $35 for annual dues. So you either fill out this form and leave it at the front desk. If you want, they'll take your credit card at the front if you like, if you don't want to write it down, or you can go online and sign up. But we would love to have as many people sign up as members. You get a special discount on your lunch each week. Actually, if you, just the discount you get on your lunch pays for your $50. So if you come here every month, you should do that. It will save you some money. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Susan Hay-Patrick, who will introduce today's program. Susan?
It's great to see so many of you here today, so thanks for coming. I think, as you all know, on any given night, several hundred people are homeless in Missoula. And they're not just the relatively few high-profile, most troublesome folks who hang out on the courthouse lawn or panhandle downtown. They are families staying in motels because they can't afford first and last month's rent and a security deposit. Their kids aging out of foster care with no place to go. They're women and children living in cars. They're high school students couch surfing between their friends' homes. And they're largely invisible. And many of them are homeless through no fault of their own. And they're never quite sure where their next meal or night of shelter will come from. Against this backdrop, and following a national trend begun under directives from President George W. Bush, in 2011, Mayor John Engen and the Board of County Commissioners appointed a diverse group of business, local government, nonprofit, and community representatives charged with developing a comprehensive and realistic plan to end homelessness in Missoula within 10 years. The panel was co-chaired by former City Councilman Jason Weiner and me, and included several people who are here today. Jenny Merriam from the city, Jason Erickson, then at Treasure State Bank, now at First Security Bank, County Commissioner Gene Curtis, Jim McLeod, and Pat Korrick from the Farron Group, developers, Keithy Worthington in the City Attorney's Office, Michael Moore, who was at the time United Way's Community Relations Manager, who became the principal author of the plan and was its first coordinator. He always jokes that he went on vacation, and when he came back, I told him he was writing the 10-year plan. Mary Hutton from Providence St. Patrick Hospital. Nick Roberts, who was then director of the foundation at Community Medical Center. And Shirley Tiernan, a longtime volunteer, a social worker, and representative of the faith community. We acknowledged from the get-go that we weren't experts in homelessness, but we thought we were experts at getting things done. Along the way, to inform our work, we met with and heard testimony from dozens, at least 100 people, many of you are here today, from all aspects of our community: federal, state, city and county officials, people experiencing homelessness, folks from the UM and the school district, both hospitals, public and nonprofit, housing and social service and healthcare providers, mental health service providers, landlords, developers, emergency responders, including police and fire department. realtors, property managers, and folks from the library, where so many homeless folks spend time. The result was Reaching Home, Missoula's 10-year plan to end homelessness. Both aspirational and practical, it is designed to, within 10 years, bring homeless people into stable housing appropriate for their situations. It's a blueprint to confront the causes of homelessness and create housing and supportive services to end it, and to provide a better return on public dollars for the taxpayers, all of us. 10-year plans have been created and are being implemented in hundreds of communities nationwide because increasingly it is a condition of federal funding, and government is by far the biggest source of funding for housing and homeless services. And speaking of money, a major reason for creating a 10-year plan was because Missoula was spending millions on shelter, healthcare, and other services for homeless Missoulians without creating long-term solutions. We treated the Poverello Center like the answer to homelessness. And the answer to homelessness isn't shelter, it's housing. This process, the plan is now, as you'll hear, in its 5th year, isn't easy or cheap. If it were easy and cheap, we would have done it by now. But finding housing appropriate for everyone's situation is complicated. The woman fleeing her abuser and staying with her children at the YWCA's shelter is different from the guy on the courthouse lawn who is both alcoholic and mentally ill. And he's different from the young couple who have jobs but can't afford to put down first and last month's rent and a security deposit to get into an apartment. And they're different from the guy who has completed his sentence at Deer Lodge and is returning home to Missoula. By the way, this diversity is why we have to stop using the term the homeless. When we make them monolithic, we forget that every one of them has a story. Our homeless population is diverse. Everyone has a different reason for their homelessness, some by their own hand, some by the hand they've been dealt. There is no single solution. What works for one individual or family doesn't necessarily work for anyone else. As you'll hear today, the 10-year plan focuses a lot on prevention, diversion we call it, because it's far cheaper to keep people housed than to house them once they're homeless. And it recognizes that the more quickly people move into housing, the sooner they can stabilize their lives and address the underlying causes, the underlying issues that cause their homelessness. Because we know that people who are homeless are high users of public and emergency services, including hospital emergency rooms and shelter, the plan recommends strategies that provide a better return on the public's money. Ending homelessness isn't simply the right thing to do, it is crucial for our community's economic health. Missoula has a history of, we might not always agree, but we have a history of fixing things that we see as broken. We seem to show, I think, an uncommon willingness to sit down together and hammer out solutions. And that's what Reaching Home is designed to do, to end homelessness once and for all. And these 3 panelists are at the forefront of implementing the plan. They're all 3 on the front lines, and they are all very impressive women. First of all, Reaching Coordinator Theresa Williams. Theresa started her job as a United Way employee because we at United Way housed Reaching Home, supported by city and county funding as well as private donations, including from many of you here today, for its first 5 years. Last year, we transferred Reaching Home and Theresa to the City Office of Housing and Community Development out of a feeling that the plan belongs where it can attract the most resources and where the most resources are to support it. And that is, as I said earlier, in the public sector. United Way continues to focus on Reaching Home as a major initiative and to raise significant private donations to support it, but it's now part of the city's Office of Housing and Community Development. So Theresa is a licensed clinical social worker who's worked in the behavioral health and homelessness arena for the past almost 15 years. in both Montana and Oregon in a variety of capacities, ranging from direct clinical practice to administrative and program development functions, and now community organizing and policy development. She worked part-time at the POV in 2003 while she was a student at the University of Montana. Prior to coming to United Way and now the city as Reaching Home Coordinator, Theresa directed our county jail diversion program, providing counseling, case management, and suicide assessments. And she continues, right, to train new detention staff?
Stop that.
Oh, you did? Oh.
I had to get rid of something.
She has a master's degree in social work from Portland State University and a bachelor's in social work from the University of Montana. Erin Pehan has been engaged in community development and social justice work in Missoula for the last 20 years, currently as director of the Office of Housing and Community Development for the city of Missoula. Prior to joining the city, I'm sure many of you knew her in her capacity as executive director of the Poverello Center. During her tenure, she led the POV through a very complex relocation project, raising over $5 million in capital and securing new market tax credits to build a debt-free facility. In her current role, Erin is spearheading the creation of a comprehensive housing policy, ensuring that community members have access to a diverse array of housing options that they can afford. She also provides leadership and oversight of Reaching Home and is responsible for strategically employing federal entitlement funds to support affordable housing, public facilities, and services for low-income Missoulians. And Jill Bonny manages the veterans programs administered by the Poverello Center. She has her master's from the University of Montana in social work and is vice president for the Montana chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. She has played a very large part in implementing coordinated entry, something that you'll hear about today, an integral part of Reaching Home. And she is passionate about her work. They are all passionate about their work to end homelessness. So again, thank you very much for being here. I don't know who's speaking first, but Theresa. Please welcome Theresa Williams.
I feel like after that intro, we're kind of done already. Like that, I don't know how I'm going to give you any other updates. So thank you so much for having us. I'm both nervous and excited to be up here. There's a lot of you in this room, so this is just great to see all of you. If you want to hit the next slide, whoever is controlling that. Brian, thank you. Next slide. Yeah. Thank you. Yep. Are you going to be my point person now? Okay. Thank you. Yeah. No. So just kind of want to give you some context. The 10-year plan is written out in 3 different phases. So the first phase from 2012 to 2014, we have the second one, and we are actually embarking on the 3rd phase since we're in 2018. And so we're going to focus on kind of wrapping up phase 2 to let you know what's happened in the last year. And then we're going to talk about kind of what our next steps are for the sustainability piece in phase 3. So I just want to give you an overview of that. And then just today, because we don't have a lot of time, everything's going to be high level. We're going to, I wanted to give you kind of a scope of the coordinator position so you can kind of see how broad it is, and then we're going to be focusing more on the coordinated entry system part of things. So as my role as the coordinator of Reaching Home, really have to make sure that we're in alignment with the federal and state plans on ending homelessness and implementing and updating and monitoring the plan's progress. And then I am the At-Risk Housing Coalition, which is a coalition made up of nonprofit, public, private, city government, county government representatives, and we're all working on trying to end homelessness. And there's a lot of subcommittees with that as well. And I could probably spend half a day talking about what the At-Risk Housing Coalition does, but we're not going to go there today either. Community outreach and education, that's a huge piece of this role. Again, really happy that you guys are here because this is part of that and educating the folks around homelessness. And then crisis intervention team, that's another hat that I wear. So I'm our mental health coordinator, so that trains law enforcement how to de-escalate and recognize mental health crisis. So we can work on jail diversion and other aspects as well. So as a social worker, wear a lot of different hats. And that's why when you were saying still doing the training in the jail, no, I had to stop. I had to get rid of one of those hats so I could focus more on reaching home. So we will focus on coordinate entry. Next slide. So Coordinate Entry System, I'm calling it version 2.0. We had launched Coordinate Entry back in 2013, around there I would say. And this was, it was really involved in agencies that had to do it, so we didn't really have the entire community a part of Coordinate Entry. And so this last year, we now have multiple agencies coming around the table working on Coordinate Entry, and we're going to talk about that. But to really give you a visual of what Coordinate Entry is that we have a common assessment process happening. So people are coming through access points where they're using the same assessment tool, the same everything. The process is equal access. We want to make sure that there's no wrong door. The system can be really complicated on how to get housing, so we really wanted to simplify it for folks. Once people come into Coordinate Entry, then we have this navigation process to really figure out how to best match people to the housing intervention that meets their needs. And then we also connect them to housing and support. So I think this is the high-level picture that will really give you an idea about Coordinate Entry. And again, we'll keep diving into this, but I just want to give you that visual. I forgot to mention that I talk fast when I'm nervous, so I apologize. And we don't have a lot of time either, so I'm going to take a sip of water, slow myself down. I use humor when I'm nervous too, so. So we've implemented a lot of different strategies and components to Coordinate Entry in this last year. I'm not going to focus on all of them. I'm going to focus on these ones so you can kind of see the picture. Again, I could spend a lot of time with you guys going over this. So some of the new strategies include a crisis response system. So similar if you're in a mental health crisis, the goal is to try and get you to help resolve that crisis as quickly as possible, right? And so same thing with homelessness. You're in a housing crisis. How do we resolve that crisis as quickly as possible? We don't want to prolong it. So in that process of retooling to a crisis response system, we have really changed the language in our shelters. So we didn't really have to do a lot of policy changes. Really, this is a crisis bed. This isn't a shelter bed. This is a crisis bed. The conversations are more intentional about housing from day one, not come into the shelter, let's settle down, let's relax. No, let's get you hot potato. This is a crisis. Let's try to resolve your housing crisis as quickly as possible. Intentional diversion efforts. So similar to, you guys have probably heard about jail diversion. Same thing, similar concept for homelessness in that we want to try and help families and individuals identify safe alternatives to even entering shelter in the first place. Take a breath. And I'll talk more about that in the cost savings. Again, with our Coordinate Entry system, all of our access points to Coordinate Entry are doing diversion at all the front doors as well. So we'll talk about that. The other component of Coordinate Entry is ensuring our limited housing resources are being targeted to the most vulnerable households based on a common assessment tool. So we're not doing the first come, first serve anymore, because we realized that the system savvy folks, or maybe they had the right case manager, or it was based on luck, they were getting in. Meanwhile, we've got people that are on the streets that have been on the streets the longest, that are most likely to die if we don't put them at the front end. So we've really switched that process up as well. And then we're also streamlining our services and resources to avoid duplication and to increase the cost effectiveness of housing interventions. So we are essentially one agency now, our homeless delivery system. So instead of having multiple agencies, we're one agency, we're coordinating, we're collaborating, and we have one caseload. So prior to Coordinate Entry, I might be at agency A, and I have my caseload behind me that I'm responsible for housing, and I might say, okay, well, so-and-so is vulnerable, I'm gonna try and get them in first, and kind of go down. But now, I wasn't able to see everyone else, that was in the community and how vulnerable they are. So this really helps us see the big picture. The other piece, knowing the big picture and kind of, how many people are vulnerable kind of on a spectrum, we can make sure that we're matching, the highest need folks with the highest level of intervention for housing versus, the opposite. We're also collecting system-wide data that clearly defines the need, the gaps, and the strengths. So again, that was at a very, agency level. Now we're seeing it at a system-wide level. So again, back up real quick. I didn't give you the cue. So again, these are just some of the strategies. This is not inclusive of every single thing that we have changed and redesigned in our coordinated entry system. But again, just want you to see this as high level, what we're focusing on. With the system-wide data, it's helping us see how many people need a short-term housing subsidy for rental assistance. How many people actually need a long-term support, like permanent supportive housing, which is a voucher that comes with supportive services. So it really helps us see, again, big picture, what do we really need? The strengths, I think, in this process is that now we're able to see at a system level how many people are able to self-resolve their situation without the system stepping in. So that's another aspect that we're tracking and collecting, whereas perhaps those are the folks that were getting the assistance, so we're not really sure. But at least it's great to see how many people can actually resolve their homelessness without us stepping in. Okay, now you can go. So diversion, Susan had mentioned this earlier. So diversion is really, it's an approach, it's not a program. And it's having a conversation with someone when they come into, when they're trying to access the homeless delivery system. And so they might have lost their housing within, maybe that within the last week, last month, but it was pretty recent. So diversion is, so let me back up. We have a lot more people that need housing resources than we actually have the resource for. It's very unbalanced. So we really want to rely on, people to, look at the natural supports that they have within their family and friend system. So before someone even tries to come into the coordinated entry system, our staff are attempting diversion, and we're tracking it. So we're tracking whether or not, was it successful? Was it unsuccessful? Did it cost anything to try and divert them? So we're really trying to track that. And so we know that, I know you guys are all looking at the numbers, and maybe I should have waited, Brian, to have you switch over, because you're seeing this awesome cost savings. But I want to really give some context around diversion. We know that, a lot of people, and our data, our point-in-time data supports this, homelessness is very brief for the majority of households that we see coming into our system, that it is 1 month or less. It's very short. And so with diversion, we're trying to be creative and helping people avoid coming into the shelter system, which can be really traumatic on families with kids. If you're reading this ahead of time, you can see it's really expensive to have people come into shelter. So again, we want to help families and individuals identify safe alternatives than to coming into the shelter system. Oh, so we do know that 2/3 of every diversion attempt does not cost anything. It's just having a conversation. It's helping them. When you're in crisis, it's hard to think straight, right? You're irrational, you're worried. It's really hard to think about, oh yeah, I do have an uncle that might put me up and help me until I can find permanent housing. And then we know that 1/3 does cost a little bit of money. And that could be maybe a $200 gift card for groceries to help, supplement some of those costs of doubling up and staying with a family member until you can find permanent housing. In other communities, not in our community, diversion is now just an added job responsibility for our front doors, for our access points in coordinated entry. But it's really about, they have diversion specialists in other communities. And it's really about conflict resolution and mediation is what it boils down to. Okay, now we'll get to what everyone's been reading as I've been talking. So this just really shows the cost savings and the effectiveness. So let's say that our system exited 100 households from emergency shelter to permanent housing in 2017. by implementing diversion and experiencing a 50% success rate. So we know that on average, it's about 50% success rate of diverting families. It's a little bit lower for individuals, but it's higher for families. So the cost of emergency shelter is $1,600 per month, and this is based on the Department of Housing and Urban Development numbers. And cost of diversion, $200 per household. And again, I said 2/3 don't require any sort of money. So if you have 50 households times 200 each, that's a $10,000 diversion cost. If you have 50 households at that $1,600 per month, that's about $80,000, almost $19,000 monthly. So by diverting 50 households from shelter, look at the cost savings. It's huge. It's huge. And right now, we're just having the conversation because we don't have the system built up. We don't have the diversion specialist. We're just having conversations with people at the front end. And again, so the pieces that we've implemented with this new design is just a culture shift, really, when it really boils down to it. Okay, we're ready. Okay, I gotta go fast. So ending homelessness. So the other piece that we came together at the beginning of this year was, okay, what does it really mean to end homelessness? Like that's lofty. How do you end homelessness? How is it a zero? How will you never, see homeless, folks on the streets again? So we really landed on a really great definition. So it's making sure that people have rapid access to safe, long-term housing that's sustainable for them. So again, talking about that, the crisis response system that I was talking about. We need to ensure that we have a system that's in place to make sure that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. In order to get there, we have to end chronic homelessness. So again, that's why our system has shifted to prioritizing our most vulnerable folks to the top so we can end chronic homelessness. But we also have to understand that, this doesn't mean that no one will ever experience a housing crisis. I can't prevent that. But what we can do is just make sure that we do have a system in place that can respond rapidly. Okay, next. So functional zero. So this is a concept that the veteran community is using. How many people have heard of functional zero? Not very many. So the federal government's been putting a big push on ending veteran homelessness. So this is kind of the definition that they came up. So I know we're not going to probably get ever to a hard zero for homelessness, but we can at least have a functional zero for ending homelessness. So it just means that for that population, that our housing placement rate is greater than the number of people that are experiencing homelessness. So it's a very balanced system. I want to maybe invite Jill up to talk about functional zero. So she's going to give you a snapshot of what it looks like right now based on the data. And again, this is about veterans, but we are going to take the same definition and apply it to all the other populations as well. Okay.
So you can go to the next slide. So this slide shows situation A shows that the number of homeless veterans is less than or equal to the number of veterans experiencing homelessness. Situation B, which is where we are right now, shows that the number of homeless veterans is greater than the number of those that we are placing into permanent housing. So I'll give you some numbers in the veteran population quickly because I want to make sure we can get to Erin. So we took some numbers at 90 days, so the end of August, since we launched coordinated entry the beginning of June. And we had 47 veterans experiencing homelessness, and our monthly housing placement rate was at 2.3, which doesn't sound great. But at that time, we had 7 veterans that we had placed into permanent housing. So then we also looked at some current 6-month numbers, and that was at the end of December. We looked back the last 6 months, so July through December. And we had 53 veterans experiencing homelessness. Not necessarily do I think that the number of homeless veterans got higher, but we just had more entered into the system. And our average monthly housing placement was at 2.8. That number then was 17. So we had placed 17 veterans into permanent housing. Also, there are 9 additional veterans that were not entered into coordinated entry just because we were trying to get up and going. But we did help assist them getting into permanent housing, and so that number would be 26 if we included those, which I like to say that we put 26 veterans into permanent housing. And then if we have time, I'll tell a quick story, just kind of a situation about one veteran that we did place into permanent housing. I'm going to call this veteran Ryan for confidentiality reasons. Ryan is a veteran of the United States Army and is in his mid-50s. For the past decade or so, Ryan has been homeless, not living in one place for more than a few months at a time. When he was asked when he last had his place of his own, Ryan stated it had been many years. He has many barriers that make it difficult for him to gain employment and housing, including a criminal background, which resulted from life on the street, no income, and a lack of rental history. When coordinated entry launched in Missoula last summer, Ryan had been staying at the Poverello for a few months. He'd been trying to find a job, but had not been successful. He had skills that would make him a good employee, but his criminal background was all that employers would look at when they saw his resume. As you can imagine, it was hard to get up every morning in a homeless shelter with 160 other people, take a shower, keep your clothes neat that were kept in a small locker, and look presentable and go out and look for a job. Hearing no over and over didn't make that any easier. Ryan wanted to have his own apartment, but thought he needed to have a job first. Through coordinated entry, once a week, individuals that provide housing and housing assistance for veterans were sitting around a table together talking about the most vulnerable veterans who were currently homeless and needed assistance. Ryan's name came up. Since he was considered chronically homeless and had many barriers to housing, he was a priority for this group. Shelter employees stated that Ryan was trying to find a job, but had been unsuccessful so far. We had an agency at the table who worked with homeless veterans by way of financial assistance for housing, and they said it was not necessary for him to find a job first. They were able to help him find housing, put him in housing, and help him with his rental assistance for several months so that he could be stable and find employment in his own place with his own closet, his own shower, and the ability to get a good night's rest. During this once-a-week meeting, we also realized that Ryan had been working with some of the other veteran service providers in Missoula, but since we were unaware of that, we were all working separately to assist Ryan instead of together. Ryan had made 3 appointments with one provider and missed all 3 because of circumstances, and that made him ineligible to make another appointment. So we worked with that agency and said, can we schedule one more if we make sure that he gets transportation, get him there, and they agreed. So with the assistance of that agency, Ryan found housing in a few weeks. Since he's had housing, he's also found a job. And when I see him at the Poverello occasionally coming by for a meal, he has a bounce in his step that I hadn't seen before. In one recent encounter with him, Ryan told me that if someone told him a year ago he would have a job in his own apartment, he would have never believed them. He said he just didn't think it was possible for him anymore.
Hi, we're just going to cover a couple more slides. I love it. See, the city's such team players. Our city council president serving as our PowerPoint assistant. We're just going to talk one more, Brian. One more. Briefly about our next steps and moving into phase 3 of the plan, and just highlight all that was accomplished in phase 2. I think in making a shift like this, coming from the world of service provision and being at the Poverello Center of all of our nonprofits acting very well intentioned, but in silos in terms of how we identified, served, and supported people living in homelessness to this one central coordinated model that makes sure that nobody falls through the cracks, but that also makes sure that we're being the best stewards of the limited resources we have to serve people in the most effective way. So as we move into phase 3 of the plan, we're really working to track and achieve those HUD benchmarks that serve as criteria for ending homelessness. Coordinated entry is a fantastic example of that, along with the functional 0 definition, to make sure we're not just doing what's being required of us, but we're doing what we know works. looking at increasing permanent housing options throughout Missoula County. As Susan said before, the Poverello Center, while a phenomenal organization, is not the solution to homelessness. Housing is the solution to homelessness. And so continuing to work on all levels with all of our partners to make sure that there's housing available for people at the back end of that coordinated entry system. Where are people exiting to? And I think along with that, looking at targeted supportive housing, permanent supportive housing models for people that have specialized needs. The City of Missoula, in partnership with St. Patrick's Hospital, was recently awarded a grant from the Montana Healthcare Foundation to spend the next year creating an action plan for permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless individuals who are high utilizers of our hospital services and jail systems. There are better ways to serve those men and women that not only produce better human outcomes, but better financial outcomes for the entire community. So we're going to be working very hard with a group of stakeholders to see how we can do that better in the next year. I'm continuing to remove barriers in the system, both locally at the state and federal level. Theresa gave a great example of removing that length of stay from our shelters, not welcoming people in and letting them settle in and saying, you can stay 2-3 months, let's just start working now, start working today. We hope that you will only need to stay 3 days or 7 days, and moving people through that system more quickly. Monitoring, tracking, and reporting on system-wide outcomes, and several examples are listed there. We can't operate off what we don't know, so getting cleaner, better, and more relevant data is key in any of our initiatives. We have to be using data-driven, data-informed initiatives if we want to make true progress. Okay, next. And this is just a great visual, and then we'll open it up for questions that we like to use to highlight how the system works and how the different partners are integral to making the system work. The blue outer ring really talks about the partnerships that are in place: government, city, county initiatives, philanthropy, working with organizations like the Montana Healthcare Foundation to do what we do better and smarter. Businesses in the private community and all the support that they've given, the faith community, Missoula Interfaith Collaborative, Union Gospel Mission, all the churches that support this initiative. The nonprofit community, the YWCA, the Housing Authority, many of whom are in the room today who were doing this work and have been doing this work for decades. Really looking at general public support, the constituents that volunteer and give generously of their money, but even more generously of their time. And then really looking at the factors that need to be present for us to be successful. Efficient service delivery, things like coordinated entry. Government subsidies and support are dwindling, and we're getting less and less every year, which means we need to be better and smarter and more creative with the funds that we have. So making sure we're doing things efficiently is key. Excellence and quality, again, those best practice models. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we need to do what works. Public and political will, that we're not making decisions outside of the general community and we're bringing them along with us in our process. And then sufficient resources, making sure we're working across the board with foundations, business, the private sector, to make sure that we are building a system that's sustainable and that can operate for years to come. So with that, we would like to turn it over to your ever thoughtful questions.
We're going to have table talk. Don't get ahead of yourself. Normally what we do at City Club is now for the next 5 to 10 minutes, we do table talk. First thing I want everyone to do at their tables, introduce yourself to the person sitting next to you so you know who each other are, and then discuss today's topic. And then at the end of that 5 to 10 minutes, we'd like each table to come up with one question and designate one individual at the table to stand up and ask that question. So have at it. Take 5 to 10 minutes.
I guess I'm the first guinea pig here, so I'll start out. We actually had a pretty generally good discussion on 2 major areas we were looking at, so I'm going to put this into 2 questions. They're not necessarily directly related, but take a chance anyway. First thing we talked about was, what have you been looking at as far as efforts for housing. And the discussion that was brought up was the idea of opening up mini housing or small housing developments for not just veterans, but homeless people. You pointed out that one of the keys to what you believe success is to get people housed as quickly as possible, get them stabilized and whatever.
Make it a question.
So I'll make it a question. So first question is, what are you looking for, or what are you looking into? What other models around the country are you looking into for housing? And then the other question, which I'd like you to address too, is you're now into phase 3. What can you show for success in phase 1 and 2? How have you evaluated that? What has been the outcome of that evaluation to move you into phase 3?
I'll start, and then Theresa will correct me if I'm wrong, which she does really well. So in terms of housing, it really is a comprehensive approach, and so this is a very specialized, targeted population in looking at serving chronically homeless folks and people who really make 30% or below of area median income, so require a deep subsidy to be housed stably for a permanent period of time. And so we really, though, can't just look at that targeted population because that's not how a housing market works. And so we're really looking at housing at all levels, having adequate rentals at market rate, at a lower percentage for a minimum subsidy and at a deep subsidy ensures that the market flows well and that we've got people moving through it. As their income increases, they can move into tax credit housing at 60% of adjusted median income. And as their income increases even more, they can move into market rate, which frees up that subsidized housing. And so we know that we need adequate rental housing at all levels if we want people to be able to find housing that meets their needs. And so we really are focusing on that. Also, the home buyer market, the ultimate way to stabilize your housing is to be a homeowner. And so making sure that we're opening up opportunities for home ownership by having home buyer assistance loans, subsidies that can help people push into that market who otherwise wouldn't be eligible. Inherent in a healthy housing market is diversity as well. We need diversity of options, and so that includes for home buyers, townhomes and condos and single-family detached homes that we know. It also means tiny homes or small cottage homes, ADUs, so lots of options that can help make our market diverse and strong. So we are focusing on that as a division, and we're working with a housing steering committee at the city level that is comprised of people from a diverse sector in Missoula, from the workforce, from the housing communities, that can help us really figure out how to approach that. In terms of the plan, we have made really, I would say, steady progress towards creating the system that we have identified for you today. Some of the early successes we had were early mandates from HUD, transitioning models that were termed transitional housing into permanent housing models, and assisting organizations like the YWCA in becoming more competitive to apply for rapid rehousing dollars, which I believe they have now tripled the sum that they originally had to provide rapid rehousing, which is to identify families and house them immediately in the home that they can live in forever, instead of having them move around as the subsidy changes. So we know right now in our community we have about 160 slots annually to serve people through rapid rehousing, and that is something that has changed dramatically since the beginning of the plan. We also have successes in things like the relocation and reconstruction of the Poverello Center, which strengthens that crisis response system that Theresa referred to, making sure that when someone becomes homeless at 2 a.m., there is a place for them to go. And then we also had very early successes in the creation of Coordinated Entry System 1.0, which was a collaboration and really driven by the Human Resource Council here in Missoula to create what is called the CRIS system, which is really what we're modeling this next effort after, which was our first foray into really working as a single collaborative system to housing homeless individuals. And so we have also seen our homeless numbers in the city of Missoula go down by about 350 people since 2015. So, or since 2011. Teresa's correcting me as she should. And so we are seeing a decline, which tells us some of those efforts are working. What we can't do right now is quantify that in a good way because data hasn't been a focus, which is why we're making data a focus now. We know what we're doing is working, but we have to be able to tell that story much more effectively, and we have to know without a doubt what specific aspects are working so we can continue to really hyper-focus on those.
Next question, please.
Thanks so much. Our question at our table, we talked a lot about funding sources in this kind of changing environment, especially from the federal government. And we wanted to know what you guys are doing to plan for that in the future, as well as how does that affect kind of the goal going forward around wet housing. You guys didn't talk about that, and I know that that's a dollar-based thing. So if you kind of touch on two of those, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so briefly, I have to be more brief. Just hard for me. So funding sources are decreasing, especially at the federal level, and we need to plan and prepare for that to continue. We know that will be the case. And so what that means is, again, we have to do things more creatively and more efficiently. We have to make sure that there is zero duplication in our system and that the dollars that we are deploying to house people are keeping people housed, that they're not housing them for 3 to 6 months and then they're re-entering the system. So we have to get better and smarter at what we do. And we also have to work locally. We have to figure out how we partner with the entities and the organizations that are stakeholders in the system, those that are accumulating costs, just like city and county government are when we don't deal with chronic homelessness effectively, and figure out how we can do what we can do better and we can save money and we can divert some of those saved costs into serving people better, a really shared cost benefit model. And so that's a big focus of us moving forward, especially when we're talking about chronically homeless people who are struggling with addiction.
Thank you. We've got a question that has to do with the people on the street. Now, the HOT team, that's in effect, and is that expanded? Is that part of all of this? And they're the first people that get contacted with the homeless when they're new in town.
Yes. Brian, I'm going to put you back in charge again. If you could take us to the PowerPoint. So part of Coordinate Entry is what's called Coordinate Outreach Team. So I mentioned earlier about access points to Coordinate Entry. I might have said front doors as well. So we really want to make sure that the entry to Coordinate Entry, people know where to go and how to get into the system. So yes, we still have the Homeless Outreach Team, but we've also expanded because again, we don't want to duplicate services. So we've identified other agencies and providers that provide some element of outreach, and we brought them all together. So right now we have a Coordinate Outreach Team. So for example, we know that we have Officer Sheila Moore from the Missoula Police Department. She stays in the downtown core. So we've looked at the HOT team like, maybe we don't need to double dip and have you in that downtown core. Let's look at other areas of Missoula that we need to be doing more outreach efforts. Union Gospel Mission, they have identified some areas where they do outreach. And so we've really just taken a big map. Erin got us a big map of the county, and it's really just mapping out and making sure that we're hitting all the areas that we need to hit without duplicating. The other piece that came around with our Coordinate Outreach Team is now we have drop-in times. So we know that with the population that have been on the streets the longest, it's really hard to maintain appointments. That's really difficult. So if we say, hey, come, make this appointment at our agency, they're probably not going to make it. It's hard to keep track of time when you're trying to survive on the streets. So we have drop-in times where our Coordinate Outreach Team will be. And we have a calendar. So that's the library, that's the food bank, that's Mountain Line. So we're trying to hit up these areas so that people are easy to find and it's predictable. Does that answer your question? So the HOT team is still there, but we've brought everyone else to the table. Exactly. Yep.
Just a quick question. Can you just ballpark how many people today you think are homeless in Missoula?
Oh, man. There's the question. So right now, and let me back up. Every January, we do a homeless census, if you will. It's called the point-in-time count. So that's what really drives how much funding we get into our community and lets us know. Yeah, it's part of a national effort through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So we do this on the coldest night. We're preparing for our next one, January 25th. This gives us really great data so we know what our gaps are and try to get more funding. But it's unique identifiers. There's no name. We don't know who these people are. So the new coordinated entry system actually lets us know who they are and by name and what's going on, so we can actually help them get into housing. So that's an additional component that we have in coordinated entry. So how do I answer this question? So yeah, because this isn't an easy one, because it's, point in time in January, it's really cold, and that you really get a good understanding of who's really struggling, on our streets and unsheltered. So we had, the number was 300 something. I don't have it memorized. It is more than that today. And we're tracking based on population. So Jill shared the veteran population that's in coordinated entry, that's either sheltered or unsheltered. The family numbers, where's Cindy? Cindy Weiss might have a better idea. I think it's, I don't want to, 70-ish, yeah, I would say, of families that are both sheltered and unsheltered. So unsheltered meaning living in a place not meant for human habitation, living in their car, getting, in a motel that's paid for by charity or organization, and then our shelters are full for families. The individual number, so that includes single adults and youth, is pretty big. I can tell you that we've done over 1,000 assessments since June for a coordinated entry system, and so that number changes because people leave the area, people are self-resolving their situation, and so it's really hard to give like an actual number of what it is today, but I can tell you it surpasses what our point in time count gives us. So again, we really have a good idea of how many people are in need of housing and what's going on based on the new data that we're collecting. So sorry I didn't give you your direct number, but I hope that gives you an idea. It's big. So that is what our data is tracking. Let me back up a little bit.
The question is, what's the average time?
Okay. So right now, you guys are asking great numbers, but we don't have a great system that's supposed to be tracking all this for us, which in other states they have a system. Our statewide system is getting there. So this is all stuff that we'd have to pull manually. So we are tracking that information. I think majority of folks, and I'd have to look at the point in time data, it is less than a year. That people are spending time in homelessness. So we're seeing that people do resolve their homelessness and they're staying in short stays. But I don't know what the actual average. I'd have to look at the PIT data, the point in time data for that.
Another question? Right here.
So you've talked about efficiencies and trying to find those in the systems, and what are the implications of the cuts to mental health case management and those efficiencies?
I was anticipating this question. I think that is one of the strengths of why we're coming together and having a common caseload now, because then we can see, okay, we've got Joe here, and Joe, yeah, his case manager is now cut. He doesn't have a case manager, but we don't want him to fall through the cracks of the system. So people around the table that are meeting with us on a weekly basis in what's called case conferencing can say, hey, you know what, I'll step in and act as a housing navigator, and let's get him into housing. We have to be very creative. Very creative. I mean, it just comes down to creativity and just figuring out maybe that's Meals on Wheels once they're housed. What are some other services in the community that can help, check in and provide some supportive services? The peer support network, Missoula Interfaith Collaborative have volunteers. So it's just being very creative in these times.
There was a hand over here someplace.
I'll go with the two-question thing since other people did. How does
Jana?
Missoula compare to other cities, especially in Montana?
Yeah.
Are we ahead or behind? And again, what can we do to really create increase the capacity in our urban environment so there is housing? That's a bigger question.
And I'll pass that to Erin for that one. So first question, so Missoula is just not, plucking this system out of the sky. Like, this is best practice. And this is part of a statewide movement as well. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to go to other communities in Montana to help them launch this new coordinated entry with the new components. So that's been Kalispell, Butte. I wasn't able to go to Billings, but we had some folks go to Billings, Great Falls, Bozeman. So we're kind of starting with the larger cities and getting coordinated entry with the new components launched and then spreading out to the rural communities from there. I think Butte actually has launched, we launched the new system in June and have been implementing and tweaking since then. Butte got a little earlier head start than us, but I think as far as the diversion and the capacity and we just have the larger numbers, we are kind of leading the way in the state. Our policy and procedure document, for example, will be the statewide policy and procedure document. So everything that we're creating is kind of moving up into the other communities, especially the statewide level. So I think we're definitely leading the way.
In terms of what things need to change to increase housing opportunity and availability, specifically for the specialized population, is we have to engage in much more in-depth and comprehensive public-private partnerships. We currently rely solely on our nonprofit developers like the Housing Authority and NeighborWorks and Homeward to provide housing for targeted populations. And we need to strengthen those relationships and continue to support them in doing the amazing work that they do. But we also have to look beyond that at the the private sector in Missoula and how we can encourage and incentivize those individuals to also be looking at how we develop and provide more affordable housing, specifically to people who are trying to move beyond homelessness.
It's a couple of minutes to 1, and our deal always is that you can leave at 1. You can also stay if you'd like. But I'll ask kind of a process question. You have, as an example, veterans involved in different parts of the homeless situation here. Thinking of the system in terms of beds, who decides who gets in a certain bed and when they might go to the Valor House? What's that process between the agencies?
So the beds that are at Valor House and the beds that are at Housing Montana Heroes, which is at the Poverello Center, are transitional housing beds. When we're working in case conferencing, we're trying to get people housed in permanent housing first and rapid rehousing. Sometimes veterans especially are not ready for that immediately. So we'll put them in permanent housing, in transitional housing. So we work together as a team. Staff from the Poverello Center, from Housing Montana Heroes, and also from the Valor House work together as a team. But in the past, we've kind of looked at case-by-case examples, had people fill out applications, gotten some background information, and now with coordinated entry, we're looking at the most vulnerable veterans first. And so those are the ones that are getting the beds and have the priority first. Most likely the ones that are not as vulnerable can probably find housing with some financial assistance and do that on their own. So we're doing that together as a team within the Poverello staff and then also with other veteran service providers through coordinated entry.
It's 1 o'clock, so if anyone has to leave, please feel free to step up and go off. But let's, if you have a few more questions, we can take 1 or 2 more questions. Anyone? Right.
Thanks. So Montana and Missoula County have very high suicide rates, and I'm wondering, I don't know if you even have this data, but as your work is more refined and hopefully more effective, does that overlap with decreasing suicide rates, or are these completely different silos? I don't know. To me, it seems there must be a nexus, and I'm wondering if this is one component of suicide prevention.
So I think the best way to answer that would be the assessment tool that we use, and we're looking at trimorbidity, so mental health, physical health, and substance abuse. So I would assume that with the mental health component, maybe there's that depression piece. So how can we help alleviate that? And we're talking people that are experiencing homelessness in this situation, though, for coordinated entry. So it wouldn't be the entire population. So I think if you're looking at suicide rates among people that are experiencing homelessness, absolutely, this could have an impact because we're, decreasing some of the stressors, perhaps. There might be some studies out there that have drawn that conclusion in other communities that are farther along, but it's the best answer I can come up with right now. Yeah, great question.
One more question.
This is a quick question, so maybe you can do another one yet. But I was curious, what is your definition of vulnerability? But I think you probably just addressed it, the morbidity.
Yeah, so we're using a tool that has been vetted. It's trauma-informed. It's developed by org code out of Canada, and a lot of other communities are using it as well. So it's a vulnerability index, service prioritization, decision assistance tool. So it's just one way that we're looking at it. We're actually in the process of fine-tuning our prioritization policy as a community. So using an assessment score gives us an idea of what housing intervention we might look at, but that might not be the only thing we look at as well. So it could be length of time that they're homeless, how long, so there could be a lot of different factors. Yeah, but that is one that, the trimorbidity, that would really bring it up. And just, if you're a high utilizer of emergency services, hospital, jail, all of those pieces, that would certainly raise your vulnerability as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent
Thank you.
program.